Are you looking for a fun and informative podcast all about training working dogs? Look no further than the LWDG Pod Dog. This weekly show is hosted by me, Joanne Perrott, founder of the Ladies Working Dog Group, and I chat to experienced trainers and experts in the field who will give you helpful tips and advice. Whether you're just getting started or you've been working dogs for years, this podcast will have something for you. So pull up a chair, pour yourself a cup of coffee and tune in to LWDG Pod Dog, and let us help you build a better bond with your best friend. Hello and welcome to another episode of LWDG Pod Dog. This week we're going to be talking about a day in the life of a country life journalist. Now many of you will know the lady that I am speaking to tonight. Paula Lester is an icon on Instagram and as features editor for the magazine. How are you today, Paula?
I'm really well, thanks, Jo. Thank you so much for having me.
So before we get into our conversation piece for the podcast today, tell us a little bit about your background.
Okay, so I am a gamekeeper's daughter and I am married to a retired gamekeeper. Now you can just hear the terrier barking in the background because that's my husband about to come into the house. You can always rely on my dogs to be chatty. But yes, so I've grown up in the countryside. It's something that I care very deeply about. I feel it's a part of my soul. And so I feel very fortunate that my career in journalism has led me to a job for a magazine that really celebrates the countryside and, you know, is an absolute pleasure to work for producing such a brilliant magazine every week.
So very much roots firmly within the British countryside. How did somebody with that upbringing decide, I'm going to go into journalism?
Well, very good question, because actually when I was younger, I was very shy. And although I loved reading and I loved reading the newspaper and I used to devour my dad's copy of Shooting Times every week, I had this perception of journalists and thought that they were sort of very hard-nosed, tough people. And I wasn't sure that I would be able to do it, although I loved writing and reading. But I did some work experience at my local newspaper in Devon, the Sidmouth Herald. And of course, I very quickly found that it wasn't like that at all. And actually, if you are a warm, empathetic person and you like talking to people and you try very hard to get your facts right and, write everything down correctly, that you could do just as well. So yes, at the age of 16, I did find that I, could hopefully do it. And I haven't looked back since.
So was your plan to always do journalism around countryside sport and countryside background, or when you started out, was you wanting to maybe go as a young girl into fashion or those type of things?
Yeah, well, I wanted to be a sports reporter, and that's how I got my first sort of front page story on the Sidmouth Herald. Was I went up to badminton horse trials when Mary King, our sort of local event rider from Sidmouth, was in her heyday, and when she won, and I managed to get an interview with her, precocious young girl as I was, and I also got a picture of her as well, sort of jumping this amazing fence into the lake at badminton. So that was sort of like my big first splash, and yeah, that's what I wanted to do. And after I actually went and did a degree in journalism at the London College of Printing, which I can tell you was an education in itself, having grown up in the sticks in East Devon to then go to college in Elephant and Castle in London was quite eye-opening, shall we say. And then once I graduated, I was offered a job with the Sidmouth Herald, and I did that for 2 years, got paid £7,000 a year and did all the sort of, basic things that you need to do as a cub reporter. So I went to council meetings, I covered the local magistrates court, I, developed relationships with the local police stations, everything you could try to do to sort of reflect the local news as best you can. And it was a fantastic job. And then I got my first job in magazines, for Horse and Hound magazine. I was Young Rider and Pony Club editor, because it just so happened that at that time they were looking for young journalists with newspaper experience who obviously knew about the countryside, and as well as being a keeper's daughter, I was very horsey at that stage, so it was quite a good fit. And I soon realized that actually magazine journalism and journalism that related to the countryside and my life was a good way to go, and I haven't deviated from that.
I'm always fascinated when I talk to people how lives are intertwined but not connected. Like, I grew up reading the Horse and Hound, very much a horsey girl through and through. So I probably at one point, sat and read your stuff, and you never see what's coming in the future. Of course we can't, but there is that like theme, I suppose, where you all sort of go in one direction, one flow that's controlled by your passions, the things you are interested in. So you were in the Horse and Hounds, writing this sort of piece regularly that probably myself and other people listening to this have read. How did you go from there to where you are now?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head, Joe, because it's all about people, and it's all about the people that you meet along the way, isn't it? And I think that this is a fascinating thing about the field sports community and the dog community, is that it's actually quite a small world. So you tend to bump into the same people as you go through your life. So coincidentally, the gentleman who gave me, or decided I would get this job on Horse and Hound, is my now editor, Mark Hedges, who is editor of Country Life, and at that stage was deputy editor of Horse and Hound. So he obviously perhaps saw something in me that he liked and he felt he could rely on, and hopefully still does. So we've worked together very closely for 30 years. Same with other people that I work with now. So Kate Green, our deputy editor, used to be editor of Eventing magazine, also worked for Horse and Hound. So you find these brilliant people who basically love and trust you, and that's what it's about. So I worked for Horse and Hound for it was 3 years altogether. It was a very short career in my early 20s, and I was promoted to be racing editor, which was again an absolutely brilliant job. And then Mark Hedges, I'm sure hopefully some of the listeners will remember this, he became editor of Shooting Times. And he was very honest about it at the time. Although he had done a lot of shooting, he didn't really know the ins and outs, perhaps, of the industry or of shooting really. And so when he moved over to Shooting Times, he said, "Can you find me a gamekeeper who will be prepared to write a weekly column about his job?" Gave me quite a long list of what he wanted from this chap. He wanted him to be a member of BASC, Game Conservancy, the National Gamekeepers Organisation that had just started in those days. He said he's got to be good looking, he's got to be articulate, he's got to be intelligent, he's got to be this whole thing. And basically this man turned out to be my now husband. So Simon, I had met Simon. He was a gamekeeper in Gloucestershire at the time. He was interesting because he had been a drummer in a punk band before he was a gamekeeper. I'd met him through the National Gamekeepers Organisation because my dad had sort of helpfully suggested that I do their newsletter, which I really didn't need another part-time job when I was on Horse and Hound. But anyway, that's what dads do, isn't it? And Simon's dad was a Conservative MP for 30 years. So Simon had this sort of, and he was very sort of outspoken, has very progressive views about shooting and gamekeeping. So I knew that he would be good for this column. And so Mark not only gave me my present job, but also found me my husband. So
So you're very thankful to him. So now working with country life, it's not miles away from Horse and Hound, but it is now a much broader base of information that people want to read about. What made you think that this was going to be like the job for you?
Okay, well, so this was quite organic as well. So when I left Horse and Hound quite soon. So Simon and I did this. I was his ghostwriter with his column for Shooting Times for about 2 years. And then he moved from Gloucestershire and became head keeper at Belvoir Estate in Leicestershire. And so I decided to leave London, because that's where Horse and Hound was based at the time, and go freelance. And because, you know, I wanted to work my dogs. I've always had Labradors. I've always loved picking up. So, and I wanted to be, you know, a part of my husband's life as well. So I went freelance and I freelanced for Horse and Hound, for Country Life, for The Field, for Shooting Times, you know, the Shooting Gazette. As you know, there's plenty of magazines, you know, within that area. And I had a lovely time. And then we went to Holcombe in Norfolk, and again I continued, because as long as I had an internet connection, I could work for whoever. It didn't really matter. And I quite often get up at sort of 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, write an article, and then go out picking up, because I didn't want to miss the shoot days. And but then latterly my husband got a job as head keeper on the Langham Moor demonstration project in Dumfriesshire in Scotland, and we moved up there, and it was an incredible experience. It was a huge challenge for my husband, but for the first time I wasn't as involved in the estate. And also it was at the start of the recession in 2008, and a lot of my work dropped off, and I found that I was spending increasing amounts of time at home on my own. And if I'm honest, I actually became very lonely and very depressed, and I didn't really understand what was happening, because I would say I'm quite positive, a sort of you know, I'm glass half full rather than half empty. So it took me a while to work it out. And of course Simon was extremely busy. You know, it's a huge tract of land up there. It's one of the Duke of Buccleuch's grouse moors, 90,000 acres. The project area is 30,000 acres. He was loving it, had a great team of gamekeepers trying to restore this moor and get driven grouse shooting back while maintaining the population of hen harriers. So you know, it was quite a test for us as a couple. And I was still doing freelance work for Country Life, and then the features editor said to me that she was pregnant and she was going to be going off on maternity leave. Would I be interested in covering her job? Now, see, this is quite difficult because Country Life is based in London, and how was I going to do this? But fortunately, I bumped into another friend at Badminton Horse Trials that year, and she had said to me, look, Paula, if you need to come and do some work in London, then you can come and stay with me. And actually, I'm forever grateful to my friend Beanie, because if she hadn't have said that, then I probably wouldn't have got this job. So it goes back to what we were saying about people in your area and helping you out. And so I said to my husband, look, this is a bit of a big ask, but there's this possibility of this job in London. What do you think? I'd really like to do it. And he said, well, look, I don't really want you to go, but I know that you're unhappy and we're a team. So if there's any way that you can make it work, where you go down and work in London during the week and then come home to Scotland at the weekends. And that's what we did. And long story short, I ended up doing 2 spells of maternity cover back to back. And then I eventually got the job. And it's my absolute dream job. And I feel so grateful to do it.
It's really interesting listening to you about like the relationship with your other half, because myself and my husband, we're very much in some ways similar. We've never had to be that far apart, but if you're very much love the work you do, he's an outdoor activities manager, he absolutely loves it. He thinks there's nothing more exciting than jumping into water or riding a quad bike. He really loves it. And when you're very much both passionate what you do, you have to sometimes allow the other person space to do it, don't you? Like, there's been times I've said to him, like, I'm going to Prague or Barcelona and I'm going to be gone for 5 days and you're going to have to be everything in the house. And he's like, go. Or he said, I've got to go to Malta or somewhere and I'm going to do this. And I'm like, go. Because that's the really important thing about strong relationships. They allow the other person to grow.
Definitely, absolutely. And I think, it's, as a young woman, it wasn't something that I appreciated, but it's so true. And actually it worked for us because Simon's 17 years older than me. So for a while, we'd sort of, we ended up eventually buying a flat in South London so that I could stay down there during the week and then come back. And it was quite good, actually, because Simon would take me to the train station and the start of the week and then pick me up at the end of the week. So it was quite romantic, really. But eventually, Simon decided to retire from his role, and we ended up moving back to the West Country, which is something I'd always wanted to do because that's where I grew up. So we now have our own lovely place near Sherborne in Dorset, and obviously, and also because of the pandemic, of course, you don't, goodness me, I used to get on the train every day and can't believe that I used to do it. I used to catch the 7 o'clock train every day, but I now work from home 4 days a week and just go into London 1 day a week. So actually it's all worked out brilliantly. And I also think it's better for my job because, again, I'm closer to the environment that I write about and the articles that I commission anyway, rather than being in London all the time. So
the pandemic, I think, completely changed perspective on how we work, didn't it? It made it very clear to organizations and employers that maybe would never have thought that their employees could do it, that actually it was better for productivity, for people to be in environments that they enjoyed.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it is changed our lives. There's 20 of us who work for the magazine, and it has allowed us to live in places where we want to live. And I think we are more productive as well. Those of us who whose job sometimes involves writing, it's far easier to do it quietly at home than it is in a busy office where someone, you could just have thought up the best sentence in the world and then someone will come over and ask you a question and you completely lose that train of thought. So I think we very much have the best of both worlds at the moment.
So now you are living somewhere you love with the person you love, and you are responsible for the features in what is a very established magazine for Britain. How does that feel? What's it like to work for a 125-year-old magazine?
Well, Joe, I can't believe it, really. I sometimes have to pinch myself that this shy, little, unassuming gamekeeper's daughter from Devon managed to get this job. But there you go. I think that it's a good fit. It aligns with everything that means so much to me. I've lived and worked in the countryside all my life, and obviously through my dad's job and my husband's job and all the people I know so well. I know how passionate people are about the countryside, how hard they work to make sure that it continues to thrive, and also that that camaraderie and love of between the people who love field sports, who love working their dogs. I think it's such a special thing, and I feel so privileged to be able to sort of be a small part of that through my job. I mean, on a day-to-day basis, I'm more of a commissioning editor than a writer, so my job is sort of quite behind the scenes. A lot of the general features in the magazine, I will have either thought of the idea or commissioned someone else to write the idea. So spend a lot of time basically bossing people about, saying, will you write this article? Will you write 1,400 words on this? Will you make sure that it covers these topics? and then it comes in, and then we have to check that it's okay. And if it's not okay, it's a bit like doing your homework wrong. I'm afraid it very politely goes back to the person, and we say, look, can you have another go at this? It's not quite how we wanted. Although, to be fair, we don't do that often, because we're very careful in the way that we brief things. And then once the copy comes in, we have the fun part, really, of working with the rest of the team. So the deputy features editor and I will have a meeting with the pictures department and the art department. So we'll talk to the picture editors about what images we might like to illustrate a piece, whether we're going to commission an illustration, and that, that's great. And then we work on the headlines, get the best headlines we can, and then the copy goes to the sub editors, and again they will fact check everything and make sure everything is correct. And then the designers will design the layouts, and then we get to look at those layouts and again spend a lot of time making sure that they look as good as they can be, and we present them to the editor, and it's like this sort of big roller coaster that it never stops, because it's a weekly. It's the only perfect bound weekly on the newsstands. It goes to press every Friday, and you've got to do it. If you don't do it, there's going to be a big hole or big space on the pages. And I cannot tell you the absolute pride of having this thing, this beautiful production in your hands that all of you have worked so hard to produce, and that really does reflect why the countryside and its people is so important. And it is, the other gratifying thing is that more and more people want to read this. So in an age when, let's be honest, a lot of publications, their readership numbers are going down the pan, because we consume our media so differently these days. I mean, even talking like this, isn't it? I mean, podcast is a relatively new thing. So there are many other ways that people can spend their time, as opposed to reading a good old-fashioned magazine. But we're so happy that so many people continue to want to read our magazine, and so therefore we strive every week to make it the very best that we can do.
It is amazing how, just how the world has changed, isn't it? Like I said, social media, the amount of things vying for our attention. On top of that, though, I think the countryside have to fight against this huge social media presence, changing people's perspective of the countryside, and not always in a great way, in a very negative way. When you see TV, TV people really damaging the countryside, very much putting their biased perspective on what's going on. There must be a sense in your organisation that you really do have to keep on putting forward the best face of what the countryside really does offer.
For sure. Like you say, you've hit the nail on the head there, Jo. There's so much going on social media, and it's very powerful. And it would be remiss of us to ignore it, because there are people that know how to use it very well. So we've always said at Country Life, we're not political, but we are for the countryside. So what we try to do is make sure that we put a balanced view across. And obviously it's not just lovely, colourful, pretty stories about wildlife. We also we have 4 news pages every week where we try to make sure that we are putting across an accurate portrayal of things that are affecting people that week. And we also have a very strong sort of leader opinion. Well, we have a leader opinion column at the front, and we have another column called Agri-Means, which is a country crusader, anonymous person who writes very punchy articles. So yes, we do feel it is incumbent on us to speak up and put across views that, like you say, may not be being heard in the mainstream media.
I always think as well, I'm very much probably like yourself, I don't want to get into politics, but I do want the truth to always be told. it's very easy for things to be put a slant upon to suit the person giving the story. And I always think that the more we do to show the countryside as is, but also the value it plays, because I do believe that as a nation, we've lost the perspective of what the countryside is. It's not just a green playing space, which, I see my husband and the work he does, and thousands upon thousands of people coming into the countryside to play and enjoy it, and so they should. But those people need to have a real clear perspective and understanding that whilst they enjoy playing in it, it is an industry, it is an environment, it is a workplace. And do you feel within your magazine it's getting that balance of showing people, look, there's loads of stuff you can enjoy and love, but you also have to take on board what the countryside does?
Yes, entirely agree with you. I mean, our magazine really was started as a sort of idyllic view in the late 1890s of how, of architecture, really, of country houses, and that's why it has that strong base. It was sort of like a romantic ideal for people who wanted to build these lovely places. But there's one thing that's always struck me, and having been privileged to live and work on so many beautiful estates around the country, that somebody once said to me when we lived at Holcombe, I used to help give private guided tours of the hall, and somebody once said to me, "Aren't you jealous that you don't live in a big house like this?" I said, "No, I'm not. To be honest, I would not want the responsibility." At Holcombe, there's a centre, that beautiful Palladian house is at the centre of a 25,000 acre estate. There's 300 cottages there. Thousands of people work for it. The responsibility of the Earl of Leicester to keep that going, to be the custodian of that land, I think is enormous. And I think the other thing that we try to get across through the magazine as well, just as you say, is like, say somewhere like Holcombe, it looks beautiful because it was planted for shooting. All those beautiful, lovely copses of trees, small woods, they were put there for someone's pleasure. And that's what other people need to understand, that the countryside just doesn't just look like it is by a happy accident. It's because through thousands and thousands of years, all these incredible landowners have taken the time, the effort and the money to plant trees, to maintain it, to make sure that it's there for the future. They've done things that they could never have possibly seen in their lifetime, but how amazing and incredible that it's stood the test of time and it's there now. But like you say, it's only there because the farmers are growing their crops, rearing animals, and it all has a purpose. And that is something that we definitely try to reflect through our pages. Like you say, it's not just the green and present land, it's everything that goes on to maintain it, and the people that work so hard to make that happen, and whose efforts should be better recognized.
I'm always like, I have friends who are maybe not from the same idealistic places as myself, of where people in the world would all understand what happens in the countryside, and they'll ask me questions, and I say simple things like, do you realize that probably without shooting, most hedges wouldn't exist, or without subsidy, hedges wouldn't exist? And they're like, why not? And I'm like, because they wouldn't, because the farmer could have more land if we just took away the hedges. And then it's that understanding that's not being educated. It does get me quite passionate that our British school system doesn't educate what happens in the countryside correctly, but also that our shooting fraternity, our dog fraternity, the people listening to this right now, people who read your magazine, it's our responsibility not to argue. We don't need to argue, but to educate from a really loving place. Look, these people don't know what they don't know. It's a little bit like with us with our dogs, isn't it? We don't know that stuff. So let's educate them in a really nice, informative way so that they are better understanding.
Yes, no, totally with you. I mean, my husband feels very strongly about this too. he often says, you know, it's such a shame that in schools you don't really have the nature table anymore. Do you remember when you had found like perhaps you'd found a bird's nest on the ground, or you'd found something and you took it in? I mean, you know, it probably would be really frowned upon now. And you know, or perhaps having a nature walk as a part of the lesson, because how can those children understand and appreciate things if they don't see it, or they're not allowed to get dirty? I mean, remember, you know, playing outside with my sister all the time, you know, making mud pies. I mean, perhaps we were a bit simple, but I can't really imagine children, you know, many children wanting to do that now. And I mean, I was very cheered a couple of weeks ago on this little shoot where I go picking up near Cerne Abbas. A friend of mine earlier this year took in a Ukrainian family, and the little boy, Markian, is only 7. Now, he used to live on the 27th floor of a block of flats in Kyiv. So you can imagine sort of life that he'd had before. And as soon as he moved in with Alan, he was totally captivated by Alan's 3 Labradors, and wanted to come out picking up. And a couple of weeks ago, he came and stood with me and my Labrador Nimrod. And Joe, I cannot describe to you the sheer joy of that boy just watching those dogs work. I mean, dancing a jig every time my Labrador brought back a bird. It's so excited. I mean, we picked up 6 birds on one drive, and he just couldn't contain himself. And he was cheering every time the gun shot a bird, and then sort of saying, "Oh no, come on," every time they missed. I mean, it was hilarious. Part of me was sort of thinking, you know, because there's all this etiquette that you're supposed to be quiet during the drive, and there's Markian sort of bouncing up and down and jumping and shouting for joy. But do you know what? Nobody cared, because, you know, this little boy's joy and enthusiasm was so infectious, and it made me, and I think everyone else who was out on that day, just sort of think, goodness me, how lucky are we to be part of this, to be able to do this, to enjoy this countryside, to watch those dogs working. And it gave me a bit of a wake-up call, really. So yeah, I think we should all be doing more to sort of promote the positive aspects of everything we do, because if we don't explain it, then people will not understand.
What that little boy was like showing you all is what we all feel inside, isn't it? Like, there's nothing that I love more than watching my dogs work. It enthralls me. You know, I was probably late to the party because I was never even meant to do this. My first time I worked a dog, I was given a trialing dog by my father and said, "Get in the beating line." I was like, what? I had no clue. I was on an estate. I was like literally watching. The dog made me look far better than I should have, because literally I had no clue what was going on. And she did a wonderful job all day. But I just think from the minute that day, because I was brought into it to help me fight my PTSD, but that day I forgot I had PTSD because I was so enthralled watching her and exercising and being part of everything that I had no time to think worrying thoughts. And I think a lot of people, they miss that as well, don't they? By not being part of a country. You don't have to be part of shooting, but even just being out with your dog, walking, understanding what's going on around you, they miss that ability to let go of worry.
Yes. I mean, I thoroughly agree, and think that my dog and the dogs that I've had over the years have definitely helped my mental health. I mean, you know, my job is fabulous, but it's also high pressure, and it requires a lot of hours, and there's deadlines. You know, it's and if you're an anxious person, then obviously sometimes it's going to be overwhelming at times, particularly when we do sort of big issues like we did back in the summer. We did a guest edit with our now Queen consort. That issue was double the size that we would usually produce in a week, and you know, was pretty full on. So to be able to just take my dog out, not even necessarily training, but just to be able to take him out for a walk and switch off for 5 minutes and concentrate on him. I just think is wonderful. And I had a Labrador since I was in my early 20s, and I never ever want to be at a stage where I'm without a dog, because I think it definitely helps, because like you say, you can go into their world instead of your own, and actually it's a very nice place to be.
What is it about the countryside and field sport? What does it mean to you? Because obviously your job is very much heavily involved in it, your background is much heavily involved in it, but what does it mean to you? What does it give you?
Jo, I think it's everything to me. I mean, I'm sat now just looking out the window. I can see a rainbow of all things, beautiful rainbow in a grey sky, and the breeze fluttering through the trees and the leaves. And I just think I actually feel really emotional about it, and it's something that was brought home to me when we lived in Scotland. And Scotland is a fabulous, most beautiful, awe-inspiring place, but it's also quite a hard place to live. And I think when we lived there, I really missed the landscape of the West Country. And it was interesting when you were talking about hedges and trees, because in Scotland, we were on the edge of this moor, which had its own, beguiling, bewitching appeal. But it's pretty bleak. There aren't many trees. There's lots of grey stone. It's far colder up there, and I just found myself wanting to be back in the landscape that I knew. And I thank my lucky stars that we managed to find this place in Dorset, which I didn't know very well until we moved here. We live in a tiny hamlet, and it's something for me about those sort of the hills, the way that the woods sit in the valley, the way that the light hits everything. And I just think we are so fortunate to live in the countryside, and I would do anything to maintain it as it is and to protect it, and to hopefully ensure that people who come after us can enjoy it as much as we have been able to do.
It's really like listening to you and your passion for it. When we were clearing Dad's stuff out this week, because Dad passed 3 years ago, only now we're really getting around to his stuff. We found the badges for when we'd marched through the Horse and Hound for fox hunting. And I can always remember being there with Dad, and he was marching through the middle of London, and we got to the tube, and there was this lady, I can still see her now, and I was young at the time. There was a lady with a baby in the pram and like loads of shopping, and she was trying to get down the tube steps, and people were pushing past her. Mm-hmm. So my dad and the master of fox hunt stopped and offered to help. And first of all, she looked frightened that somebody had stopped to offer to help. And then she sort of come around and realised it was going to be easier to accept help. And when we got down the tube, that's all my father and a lot of the other people were talking about, was how much they'd gone there because they had to, but they couldn't wait to get out of there, out of that environment, out of that concrete jungle, out of that fact that they just couldn't see the things you've been talking about. They couldn't see that view. They couldn't see the light playing against the landscape, all those things. And I'm listening to you. I think people who love the countryside, it's that stuff we see as now, and we do feel an enormous passion to protect it.
Mm. Yes, for sure. I mean, I remember those marches as well. And I mean, I was living in London at the time, but how incredible it was to sort of see that sea of tweed almost, wasn't it? Descend on the capital. And I know exactly what you mean. I can remember being on the tube and people were quite hesitant, and it was quite strange to see all these people talking to each other, because obviously nobody talks on the tube or on the bus or anything. But it didn't take long, did it, for people to sort of start asking questions, and again for this understanding to develop of why all these people would feel so passionately and feel the need to go into the middle of London to stand up and be counted. And I mean, it's always interesting to me, having grown up in a sort of shooting background and gone hunting, and there's this, sometimes there can be this sort of slight line, can't there, between the two sports and differing views, different ways of doing things. But that all fell away, didn't it? Everyone came together, to basically to go and fight and to make our voices heard. And what a moment. I just feel that all of us, like you say, we must continue to try to keep speaking up. We shouldn't hide our light under a bushel. I think there is a tendency for us, we're all quiet, polite people. We don't like to cause a fuss, but we do need to actually say sometimes, instead of perhaps sitting there quietly in the corner, we do need to say why we do things and why we love it, and why it is important, because it will help.
And I can, when we found these badges, I can remember reading the small one, and it's by the Countryside Alliance, and it says forced to, something like forced to march, ready to fight. And I thought it said everything. Nobody wanted to be there. We had to do it. And now 20 odd years on, we still fight to protect what the UK should want to protect as a whole. We should all, regardless of where we live, should want to protect what could be so easily lost. Do you think the magazine, the work you do, is it important to you that you leave a legacy along that line? You're consistently showing people what a beautiful place the countryside is.
Oh yes, emphatically. And so we're trying, I suppose in some ways we are giving an idealized view of the countryside. I mean, you'd be interested to know that about 30% of our readers live in London, which shows that for some of them, it's a sort of a lifestyle that they aspire to rather than that they live. So therefore, there is this responsibility to tell it how it is. But I'm confident that we always do that, because we speak to people all the time. We're reflecting people's views, those who do live and work in the countryside. And therefore, so I think it is quite a powerful way of explaining. And it's not, not just about field sports, it's about farming, it's about people who breed certain types of dogs, not necessarily for working breeds. It's just trying to get across all these different passions that people have, and what they are all doing in their individual way to enhance this place. And it's we'll keep going, basically. I think my boss always says he thinks that Country Life will be the last magazine on the newsstand, and I think he's probably right.
There is something so lovely though about a magazine. When I get the copy of the Gun Dog Journal, I look at it and I think, I just really like it. It's almost like a little luxury, because I find, even though we work a lot on social media, or groups are online, when you have something physical, there's nothing else vying for your attention. You can't hold your phone and read. So you have to give it your focus. And for that time, it's almost like calm in your mind. It can you can just read the pages, you can just look at the pictures, and it's almost a sense of peace from it.
Yes. I mean, that's one thing. That's why we take so long sort of choosing all the images, because it is a big format magazine. We can take the images across a double page spread, and we're quite old-fashioned in the sense that we're still able to commission photographers as well to go out to illustrate our pieces. And of course, I mean, I have great affection for the dog pieces. So I'm just looking at a magazine at the moment where my friend Susie and her chocolate Labrador Bedlam is on the front cover, and an article inside, and it's so lovely to look at that. And I sometimes wish you could see the process we go through to sort of, there's so many images and layouts that are discarded, if you like, in the quest to make sure that it appeals as much as possible. And it's quite an interesting job because it's quite subjective. Obviously, I could look at a picture and think that's lovely. The picture editor will like another one. The editor will like another one. But we usually we don't fight that much. We usually come to it. I think it's like most things. When a layout works, when the images work, it's pretty clear to everyone that that's the right one to choose. But there have been times when you sort of have 3 or 4 different versions of an article up on the wall, and we've stood there pondering for quite a long time, which one should be best. And there's also a lot of thought that goes into the order of the pages, the rhythm of the magazine. And I guess again that's something that's very satisfying. At the end of the day, you're just trying to we're in the entertainment business. We're trying to capture people's imagination and ensure that they do sit down for maybe, an hour or so every week. And like you say, switch everything else off. Perhaps, it's raining now, but, sat in front of the fire with a nice cup of tea or a glass of wine and just sit down and disappear into this world, which is actually the real world, but give yourself a chance to maybe read about the subjects that maybe you thought you knew about, but actually we found a little bit of snippet, a bit more that perhaps you didn't realize.
When I was younger, I did a degree in documentary photography in Newport, and we had a chap, and he used to make us take 300 shots on a manual, and we were only allowed to pick 5 that had to tell the story. And he showed us, he covered foot and mouth. He'd covered it professionally, and he showed us the images from it, showed us as an example 5 that could tell the whole story. And I can remember looking at them and thinking, it's amazing what can be conveyed in a photo that you don't always need words. The right photos can tell you everything that you need to know, can't they?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Joe, I was laughing with some of my colleagues the other day because obviously I'm so old. I'm 49 now, that when I started out on local newspapers, it was film, a camera with film in it. And I can remember going into the dark room and having to pull it out, in the dark, and then develop the pictures. And you sort of think, goodness, how did we ever do that now, in these days of digital photography? But that's how it used to be. And you're quite right. The images tell, pictures tell 1,000 words or whatever. And sometimes we have quite a debate in the office about how many words we're going to, include for a story, when sometimes the picture is doing the better job. But I mean, obviously I'm the features editor, so I've got to keep fighting for the words. But yeah, it's a really good balance. And sometimes we can have an article in and it will be the pictures that absolutely lift it. And it was something that when we did the special issue with Duchess of Cornwall, as she was then, and when she asked our now Princess of Wales to take the cover images, goodness me, that was so exciting because our new Princess of Wales, she was so talented that she's I mean, honestly, Joe, she submitted about 14 images and we could have used every one of them. It was very hard actually to edit it down, to take 3 forward to our now Queen Consort and ask her to choose which image she wanted. And so fair play to her. She's our Princess of Wales is a very, very talented photographer.
That must be an incredibly interesting part of your job, though, is like these type of features, these types of editions where I find that the countryside is quite an equalizer. People who would maybe never rub shoulders in real life can all be on that field laughing and joking together. your magazine sort of does that, doesn't it? You're talking to, one person down here who may be beating on an estate, and then the next minute you're talking to the Queen Consort. Do you love that part of your job?
Yes, I mean it's interesting because Country Life, I think, is perceived as a magazine for posh people, and I understand that. I think it's read by our aristocracy, our great landowners, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't appeal to everyone, including me, the gamekeeper's daughter, who is educated at a grammar school. And you're quite right. And so therefore, when we've been so fortunate to meet royalty, we've done 2 special issues with our now king. We've done a special edition with the Princess Royal, and of course, and then earlier this year with our Queen Consort. And like you say, what it comes down to actually is this shared love of the countryside, which transcends class. And it's if you have a common interest and something that means a lot to you, then the king is also passionate about trees and hedges, and wildflowers in the manner that we would be, and they love talking about it. And the other thing that we find with Country Life as well is that even the most private of people who perhaps wouldn't want to talk to the press, if you ask them about their dog, you're away, more people are happy to talk about their dogs than anything else. And what a treat that is. I mean, we had Sting's wife talking about her Irish wolfhounds, and did the most fabulous photo shoot with her, because at the end of the day, it's everyone has their own hobbies and things that mean so much to them, but if we're able to share those through the pages of our magazine, then how brilliant. And we will keep trying to include as many interesting nuggets and people's life stories as we can.
Speaking about dogs, I first met you on Instagram. Isn't that such an odd thing to say? I met you on Instagram. You didn't know I was stalking you at the time, but I find Instagram quite stalky, mate, because you read one thing somebody writes, and then you're like, oh, I'll go to their profile and I'll follow them, and then I start reading like every image, and I feel like 20 minutes later I've known everything's gone on for a year in their life. So I've watched all your stuff with your dogs, and definitely with Nimrod. Your passion for Labradors, your passion for picking up, is that like a huge part of what makes you you?
Yes, for sure. I mean, I should think my dad and my sister, if they're listening to this, they're cringing because they're big spaniel people. But I remember when I was growing up, my dad had one Labrador called Pip, and sadly, he didn't get on with my dad's dogs, and he ended up going to a friend of his to go picking up. But I think I vowed to myself from that day that as soon as I could do, I was going to have a black Labrador. So I had my first one, Boot, when I was in my early 20s, and my dear dog, he went everywhere with me. I mean, he lived in London with me when I was on Horse and Hound. He used to come into the office, and in those days it was quite strange having a dog in London. I mean, people used to try to help me across the road because I think with him being a black Labrador, they just assumed that I was blind or something. But he'd go everywhere. He'd go up and down escalators, on the bus. So he was brilliant. As you know, dogs are. They just get used to their environment, don't they? Whatever that environment might be. But I never really trained him properly. I took him picking up, but really he was a pet. And when I first met my husband, I thought, oh goodness me, he's going to force me to put Boot in the kennel, and Boot is not going to like that. But actually, Simon was very good about it and said, no, that dog's looked after you, we'll look after him. So he was privileged. He was allowed to be in the house with my husband's terrier Tiggy. So but when we got to Holcombe, I thought, well, I better going to be the head keeper's other half. I better try to have a better behaved dog. So I was lucky there, because again, you meet all these lovely people. And there's a lovely lady called Dion Ryan, who has she ran her dogs in the Retriever Championships, and she was very kind and helped me to train I had another Labrador called Sock. A bit of a theme going on with those names. And she helped me, and I just loved picking up there. And then also in Scotland, even though sadly we never got to shoot grouse at Langham, I missed picking up so much that I actually went picking up on a local rear bird shoot. And I took my Labrador Sock and my husband's other Labrador, Josh. I enjoyed it so much. But yeah, when so my dog that I have now, Nimrod, is 4 years old. I tried again I think we're always trying to develop, aren't we? Always try to improve. And I was fortunate through Instagram to find the dog trainer Ben Randall, who's won the Cocker Championship twice. And again, it just shows you, like we were saying earlier, how things have changed, how we consume our media, how we learn. And I think the pandemic, didn't it? We had so much time at home, perhaps, to start looking at things that you wouldn't have normally looked at. And I can remember seeing this video on Instagram of all Ben's dogs all lined up with all these food bowls in front of them, and he was able to call them forward individually or stop them and doing. And I was thinking, goodness me, I've never had control like that. I been one of those people where but just keep my dog on the lead during the drive, and because if I let them off during it, well, that would be a disaster. So I thought, well, I'm going to try to follow his regime, and I must say I think it's absolutely brilliant, and it's something that's worked for me, particularly as someone who has a very demanding job and has to be sat at her laptop a lot of the time. I mean, you see my dog now, he's asleep with his head on the step then. Finally learned to switch off. But what I found with Ben's methods is, because a lot of it is around meal times and getting your dog to sit, to be patient and wait for his food, which with a Labrador is quite a big ask. It is something that I can do on a daily basis anyway, even if I haven't got an hour to go out and throw dummies and do whatever. I mean, I do obviously we're very fortunate, we have a field behind our house here where I can take Nimrod. So, but I do think loads of dog trainers have lots of different methods, and it's like anything, it's horses for courses, isn't it? Something works for one person, doesn't work for another, but this particular method works for me. And the other thing about being part of the community, and I think you must find with your group that is so successful, is this coming together of like-minded people. So some days it doesn't go well, does it? You can put in all this homework, you can try as hard as you can, but maybe a small problem will develop, and it's so easy to get downhearted and demotivated. But what I find is, on Instagram, if you're honest enough to maybe post a story and say, well, actually, without picking up today and this went wrong, or his delivery's gone to pot, all my lovely friends are straight in there with a direct message going, oh, don't worry about it, this happened to me the other day, and keep going, you're doing really well. And it's so nice, because I know lots of people are very down on social media. They don't like it. They think it's this terrible thing that sort of consumes too much of our time. And obviously it can be really negative. And some people do use it as a combative space where they feel that they need to be aggressive and win an argument or whatever. But actually, on the other side of it, and particularly I think with gun dogs and other small sort of interest groups, this can be a real power for good, I think. And for meeting people, like you say, our paths wouldn't have crossed, we wouldn't have spoken. And actually it's a really good thing, and I'm glad that Instagram ended up introducing us.
too. And I think you're absolutely right. To the balance, like it is hard to get balance. It's very easy to get, like, sometimes I'm on Instagram and I'm looking at one thing, and next minute I'm looking out to IKEA hack a wardrobe to look like something else. And I'm like, how did I get here? And I find it sometimes very difficult to focus on what I'm trying to get out of it. But on saying that, it is the other side of that. Like, I would literally say my best friends in the world have come through, like, our community. They found us on Instagram, they found us on Facebook, then they've become part of our community, and then we've talked and we've chatted. And they literally are the people I go to probably every day about not just dog stuff now, just life, because they're like-minded, and I know they'll understand my frustrations or my fears or whatever. And community, I think, is something that is so important, because dog training can be so isolating. So having that, like, group, like for us, it's just all women, and we just chat about whatever, we 3 times a month we get together and we just like, how do we fix this? How do we fix this? How do we fix this? And it's having those other people who can just see something that maybe you can't because you're too close to it. It is really exciting to have those people to help you on the journey, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's so, I feel exactly the same. It is so valuable to me. I mean, I went to the game fair this year and finally met a lot of the people I'd been chatting to online. And do you know what? They were just every bit as fabulous in real life as I knew they were going to be. And in fact, they were just sort of like, they were even better. And I just felt so thankful that they're there. They're your biggest cheerleaders. We all try to help each other out. Like you say, there are always lots of different ways of tackling a problem. And I think particularly on something like Instagram, where if you are able to post a video, say specifically with your gun dog training, people will see something small that you didn't even realize that you were doing, and they can point out to you that actually, well, if you stop doing that, Paula, then that might help. I mean, Ben is always saying to me, stop saying things 5 times, you're chatting on, but I'm a bit like that with my dog. I talk to him as if he's a human being, but also I think as well, the other good thing is that I've always been quite soft, probably too soft, if you like. But that's important to me. I don't want to bully my dog into doing anything. I want him to do it because he understands and he wants me to do it, and it's a positive thing. And I think that's the other thing that's growing at the moment, is that there's a shift, isn't there? I think probably in dog training, perhaps in the last 30, 40 years or whatever, where it's changing and different methods are being adopted. So sort of things that were perhaps done with guide dogs or other training methods, because dogs are so clever, and most of the time it's not that they're being naughty or ignoring you or being deliberately belligerent. It's because you're not conveying it properly, or your body language is wrong, or there's something. And I find that really fascinating. That the more you learn, the more you can teach your dog, and the sort of the happier, more trusting relationship you can develop. And who wouldn't want to do that?
I think the more I listen and the more I learn, the more I see the challenges I've had in the past were actually of my doing, not having a negative, like judgmental view of my own training, because we don't know what we don't know, but almost because as I learn, I see how my inexperience was just confusing the dog. And we have this conversation all the time, and you'll probably agree completely with me on this. You never ever put a brand new rider on a brand new horse. It would never ever happen. It would be a recipe from disaster from the start. You take a brand new rider, you put them on a schoolmaster, and you think, let one teach the other the job. In dogs, we just don't have that. So it's pretty much always a brand new person with a brand new dog who is, it's the blind leading the blind. It's almost confusing from the start because neither side knows what's happening. And I take my hat off to people who are new, even more than experienced people, because experienced people have had the time to develop their knowledge and understanding. It's not as hard. It's still hard to train a dog, but it's not as hard. A new person with a new dog, they need to be applauded for the fact they're even trying.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And the other thing that I think I've learned over the years is, the different characters of our dogs, aren't they? They're so, I mean, even Nimrod's my third Labrador, who I've owned from a pup. I was fortunate also to be given another lovely dog a few years back, who was beautifully trained by someone else, thank goodness, not me. But they're so quirky even within that breed, and there are different things, aren't they? And they all respond differently to things. So it's it's utterly fascinating. There's so much to learn. We never stop learning. I love talking to people about it. I could talk to them all day. In fact, I met a fellow journalist a couple of weeks ago who I've not seen for years and years and years. I once did work experience on the independent newspaper, and he was on the racing desk, and the long story short is that he's got a Labrador now as well, and we just probably talked for about an hour, mostly about our dogs, and I just love it. It's such a way of connecting people, and there's so much we can learn from each other, and thank goodness.
Absolutely agree. Thank you for this. I always say at the end of these that people listening walking their dog have either had, quite a short walk, or they've gone for a while. And I definitely think today's they'll be like, oh my God, you made me walk 4 miles. But it's all good. It's always definitely worth the extra exercise. Your dog will thank you for it. If anyone wants to find you on Instagram, how would they do that?
So my account is at Paula S. Lester.
Fantastic. And obviously, if they want to find you in Country Life, they can do that quite easily through the website. Thank you so much for talking to us. It's been absolutely fascinating. It has been an absolute delight. And you're just as wonderful to talk to in life as you are to watch on Instagram. If people want to buy Country Life, where would they purchase it?
Jo, you're so kind to say that. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you as well. And I think we probably could have gone on all day. But anyway, the best place to find Country Life is your sort of, traditional news agents such as WH Smith, but also in Waitrose. And also, obviously, the very best thing is to have a subscription. And we do a very good deal where you can get six issues for £6, I think it is, and that's a good way of sort of dipping into it and seeing what a fabulous magazine it is. Obviously, I'm biased, but there is a heck of a lot for you to read every week.
Fantastic. I'll put a link to the subscriptions in the show notes for those of you who want to go along and see that. Thank you very much again, Paula. Thank you to our listeners for staying with us for what has been a wonderful podcast. And we look forward to speaking to you all next week. Thank you for listening to LWDG Pod Dog with me, Jo Parrott. Now, we all know training a dog takes time, energy and patience, but our lives can be really, really busy. Don't worry, the LWDG has got you covered. Join us for our free planning workshop where we'll show you how to use short 10-minute training sessions each day to fast forward your dog's education. Our experts have years of experience in training dogs and will help you get started on the right foot. Register now and start making progress with your furry friend today. Go to our Facebook page, the Ladies Working Dog Group, and click on the pinned post, or visit www.thelwdg.com.